For those who haven't been following this from the beginning, this is Mrs. Badger, my wife. Some may have mistaken Lisa, the bee, as being it because she's in all the videos, but I wanted to bring Mrs. Badger back in for the heck of it. And what I really want to talk about today has to do with what it was like in the 1960s and 70s when I first kept bees as compared to what's going on nowadays, because it's a very different world. I lived here during the 1960s and 1970s, and we had bees, and well into the 80s until we ended up going on tour with rock bands. But it was a very different world. The bees are the same, but they're facing very, very different circumstances. Back in the 60s, this area was pretty much small farms, family farms, 4 acres up to 100 acres. They really didn't use the insecticides that they use nowadays. And, of course, we didn't have the mite problem back then. Mites didn't really hit the U.S. till the 1980s. But they had a lot of area that they could go to forage. And there were a lot of other beekeepers in the area as well. I'd have to say within 1 mile of this house, we probably had 4 other beekeepers. Unfortunately, what's happened over the years is all those farms are gone. Everywhere you look nowadays, it's just housing developments with manicured lawns where companies come in and spray insecticides on them. There really aren't any beekeepers in the area. I mean, our lot, which is about 4 acres, is one of the last free and clear lots that the bees have to forage on. And landscapers have a tendency of killing off anything that isn't green. So they spray to kill the clover off, they spray to kill the dandelions off, and in the process they kill a lot of the bees off. Our winters used to be a lot more, rough back then. I have some pictures, and I'm going to be putting them up in frame here. And we used to have very substantial winters. They weren't necessarily very cold winters, but they were very snowy winters, and that actually worked out pretty well for keeping bees. But the biggest issue that I'm concerned about with our bees nowadays has to do with how do you get the queens properly mated. Without a lot of other beehives around, they're not going to mate. Drones and queens within the same hive are not going to mate. So you have a very limited amount of available opportunities for the queen to be well mated. And buying pre-mated queens from the south isn't necessarily a good idea because, for one thing, a lot of them come in damaged, and a lot of them just, their genetics are from an area that didn't really include the winter that we know up north. So what I've seen compared to the old days is laying patterns that look very light. I mean, we've gone in and we've used oxalic acid treatments to make sure that we're fairly free of mites going into the winter. But I wonder whether these queens have basically, mated with enough drones of enough variety that they are good laying queens, and that's questionable from what I saw in the fall. We're going to find out in the spring, and we're going to find out, as we go through the winter, whether we're losing hives because of this. But it is a real concern to me as to whether our queens are mated well enough. There's a lot going against the bees nowadays. People in the city raise bees. It isn't just a matter of the loss of land. In fact, I'd have to say, in a city setting, you probably have more hives in a 4 or 5 mile radius than you do in this area. I mean, you don't think of it too much because maybe one in 10,000 people might, try rooftop beekeeping, but you're consolidated into a city area that's, a perimeter of maybe 5 miles. So they manage to find each other. But I guess we're going to find out.